My name is Asa Al-Habibi. I serve as a director for Center for Music, Brain, and Society. Really, the idea of the center was to bring ideas and faculty and trainees from all over campus who are interested in psychology of music and science of music. So I'm glad that we are expanding, having different speakers and workshops. We had a symposium last week. We're going to hear wonderful things today. And then on December 2nd, we're going to have a book talk with Dan Levitin on his new book. So we're going to send the announcements for that as well. But yeah, please, if you're not part of the center, please join our newsletter and our email list so you'll get updated about what's going on here. And I'm going to let Beatrice go ahead and introduce our wonderful speaker.
All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm very honored to introduce Dr. Adina Mornell. She's a professor of instrumental and vocal music education at the University of Music and Theater in Munich in Germany. She has enjoyed a blended career as a concert pianist, as a music educator, as a music psychologist and researcher. She's published a lot. She has a lot to share with us. So I don't want to take time away from her. So please help me welcome Dr. Adina.
So maybe you can tell that the way I go on stage, I'm used to being a pianist who usually bow before you go to bed. So, thank you so much to both of you for the invitation. I'm really looking forward to this. It was, in the beginning, I thought it was going to be an easy topic, and it kept expanding and expanding. My roots, as you will soon see, my roots are actually from this country. But I've spent so much time in Europe that it feels like a foreign language, but I'm sure I'll get into it. I just hope that I'm not too fast. So if I start to be too quick, or I start translating from German and you hear strange sentences, I hope that the live audience here will start making noises so I will know. I like to say that I have 3 lives parallel. In my first life, and you see that here, I am a concert pianist. What you're seeing here is actually the dress rehearsal of a performance I did in the Congressional Center in Berlin in front of 5,000 people. So me alone on stage, 5,000 people in the audience. That was not the reason that I began to study stage fright, but it's one of the reasons that I feel as if I'm authentic, that I talk about stage fright. And actually, interestingly enough, these are not just microphones, they were also cameras. And I was on a screen that was 6 meters by 6 meters, enormous screen so that the people in the back could see me. And the short version of this is they didn't know that playing the piano was that much work, because suddenly they had enormous hands on the screen and they could see all the things we do. In my second parallel career, I'm a scientist. What you see here is I use physiological measurement. Back then, it was Bluetooth. Of course, it's getting ever smaller, ever smaller. These are clunky compared to today's devices. I played a public concert while I was measuring heart rate, skin conductance, and breathing. And I was recording it because I was hoping that I would be able to see the prerequisites of a mistake. For those of you familiar with the paradoxical intervention, because I was looking for mistakes, I didn't make enough. So that experiment didn't go the way I expected it to. And my third life, I'm really very, very passionate about teaching, and I've been doing teaching for a long time. The bird that you saw on the first screen, I'm not going to go backwards, the Mornell bird spends its winters in the area around Barcelona and goes up to Scandinavia in the summers, and I feel myself that I'm a traveling bird, just like my namesake, because I do go back and forth between these 3 occupations and between the 2 languages, English and German. And since I was born here in Hollywood and grew up on the west side of Los Angeles until I was 16. If I really get going, I can speak as fast as all of you, and I can also mumble, but I'll try not to. My topic, the quiet part out loud, really came from within, because I was concerned about all of the research that we do, all of the mistakes that we make as researchers that get filed in the bottom shelf because we don't want to publish them because they didn't go well. And I spent many, many, many years thinking about and developing ideas about how we can address the elephant in the room, and that is that many musicians, probably some of them are here in the hall, believe that music cannot be quantified, that a good performance is something that you have to be in the hall for, even something that is intuitively maybe something that you can evaluate, but there is no objectivity in music. We need that for science. That's part of what I'm interested in, and the other part is the relevance, which I will get to in a moment. So I'm going to take a look at music performance research. I'm going to ask these questions. How can we be objective? Is there objectivity in music research? And how can we do research that is, for us, relevant? And my talk will have 3 parts. First, I will address this question, which was motivated as a small child when I competed in piano competitions here in Los Angeles. There was lots of talk always in my pianos at my studio about who are the judges, are they fair, are they for a certain studio or against a certain studio, what are they judging us on? If you watch the Olympics, then it's often you have East Bloc and West Bloc countries giving different scores. I think all of us grow up with that sense that there are evaluations that are just not fair, and I'm going to take a look at that. But the second thing I'm going to do is see how we can apply questions we have about valid and objective research to the study of attention. This is one example I'm going to give you from my own research, and the second example will be a video study that I did that was so important for me. So let's go back to this basic question. We have the field of music teaching and learning, and we have music performance, and then we have a group of scientists, and the question is, do the two ever meet? And I had a couple of experiences that really have changed my direction. The first experience, as I said, being a child and hearing about how competitions weren't fair. The second experience was, as a very young professor, I visited the German Association of Music Psychology annual conference, and someone was up on stage. I won't say the name because I don't want to insult somebody, and I would like to change the name of the piece to protect the innocent. But what it was a perceptual psychologist who was up there, and she was talking about how if you play a Clementi sonatina on a keyboard and you raise the pitch in small increments, at what point does the pianist notice that it's been raised? And I was sitting next to a guy in the hall, and I was, as I said, fresh and didn't have much background in this, and I just turned to him and I said, well, who plays a Clementi sonatina on a keyboard? And the second question was, and who's interested in the pitch of it on a keyboard? And is that useful for the real life? And I know many people that have perfect pitch, and they would be just shocked at that this would be a topic of research. And I also said, and what are the ramifications? What's important about that? How can I take that information and can I use it? Is it that my students need to have better hearing? What is it? So that was something where I said, okay, it has to be useful. And I said to the guy next to me, I said, why? Is this important? And he said, let's go get a beer. Turned out he was a jazz musician, and he was even more shocked than I was. Okay, and however, the third thing that really set me off was, for my master's thesis, I did a literature review of over 500 articles in English and in German about stage fright. And when I was finished organizing all of this material, I came to the conclusion that most, if not all, of these studies were not relevant and reproducible for me because they had never asked the question of, can this musician play the piece in the first place? And I was very surprised that there are so many psychologists who are studying music because we are a convenience sample. If you have musicians, you have nervousness, you have stage fright. And so a lot of psychologists were saying, oh, this is a wonderful topic. All I have to do is go to the music university. I just have to knock on the door and I have the participants just right there. And this kind of, the psychologist, similar to the Clementi sonatina, creating a question and then seeing how it works in the lab, I said, we can't do that. And let me go back to stage fright for a moment. And this shocking idea that we send people up on stage and we try to rate how their performance anxiety is affecting what they play, how they play it, and how they behave on stage. And we don't know what is the baseline. Did they ever learn it to the point that they can play it, or are they waiting for that kick of adrenaline, as many of you have taught little children, that kick of adrenaline that makes everything better on stage when you're very young? It doesn't work by more complicated things. So that was my goal. I said, I've got to find out, where can we find this intersection? And that's how I set out to see what can I do. And I started an experiment a long time ago. And one of the first things I encountered, which was really crazy, was we musicians, and I count myself in this, we're not used to being honest with ourselves. I mean, there are a lot of things that we just can't be honest about, because if we don't record ourselves, we don't really know how we think, how we play. We just know what we think about how we play, and I've had experiences of that where musicians have told me afterwards, oh, I missed the F sharp in the third measure, and we've gone back to the recording and found out, no, they haven't missed the F sharp in that third measure. It's just that they'd spent all their practice time avoiding the wrong note, and suddenly they have this monstrous representation in their brain of the wrong note, and the right note is in the shadow. So it's no surprise that when they're on stage and adrenaline and the whole body is on fire, that they're remembering the wrong note to avoid and not the right note that they played. So I'm not saying that we are basically dishonest, but the problem is we are not good judges of what we do ourselves. And then, so it's very hard to ask people what they think, how they think they did. Well, we can ask them, but the question is, are we really going to get an honest answer? And part of that is also, of course, image management. When you conduct a study and you ask people, were you nervous on stage? You're going to get musicians who are thinking, oh, I better not say that I was nervous because then I may lose my standing in the class. Or I've often found, and maybe you know this yourself, that because the topic of stage fright is taboo, when I started talking about it publicly, I had students come to me and say, I'm a master's student, I've been at this university for 6 years, and you're the first person who ever used the phrase stage fright at all, because nobody talks about it. So image management, I always tell my students, if you want to study something, make sure and cloak your intent so that you're not getting the answers that they think that you want. And then we have the question of, okay, and how do we study music behavior? And I went on a search for software that would help me do this, and I had these ideas that I would have students submit videos. There used to be a Finnish software that did this, but I was trying to refine it, and I could mark on the video and have raters mark on the video where they felt passages were particularly good or where they thought mistakes happened. And I started looking, as I said, around to see what was out there, and it turns out that there is this wonderful MaxQ data that was developed for observing sheep. Now, this is, of course, useful for farmers, but the problem with observing sheep is, or what makes observing sheep easy is that you have behaviors. So as you see in the picture, you have grazing, you have standing, and you have moving. So that's pretty easy to code. Then the same software was also used for assembly line. So again, you have moments here that you could fix moments where you could say, all right, this is how many screws per minute that Charlie Chaplin in this movie, of course, is working on. We can judge his behavior, but when you start to get into music, the question is, which I discovered by accident, or I should say to my dismay, that it's very hard to mark when does something start to go south? When do we sense the tempo is picking up? When does the mistake start? It's not a point. It could be an unconscious feeling, and it's going to be almost impossible to get raters to all believe that the same problem started at the same time. It's also going to be hard to get raters to agree about what the problems are, and it's going to be almost impossible to mark videos in a sense where we will get consistent raters. So I'm going to have you do an experiment. I'm going to show you 3 20-second examples of the same piece played by 3 different musicians, and I want you to think about which one would be the best. You're going to hear Konstantin, Christian, and Claudia, 3 Cs, C1, C2, C3, and think about if you were going to be coding it and you were going to be judging how well they play and how poorly they play, and the first thing you'll notice is that a lot of things happen in just 20 seconds. So, first example. So these are the 20 seconds that I chose. The video does start at the beginning and it does go on further, and it also shows the hands, but I just wanted to have something that would be similar. Okay, that was the first one. Second musician. And now the third one. So who felt that the first musician was the best? Second? Third? I'm really sorry, but I have to tell you it was 3 times the same report. So the middle musician was the musician who actually played it. But I just wanted you to see how hard it is. We are being influenced by our eyes. We're being influenced by the third Claudia's expressivity was visible. Christian, the one in the middle, who's almost not moving at all, and yet his music is just as expressive. So good luck showing videos to raters and having them come up with the same idea, with the same results. So let me go to a study that I did with Gabriele Wolf, who is also originally from Germany, and I shouldn't say also, but she is originally from Germany and taught for many years until she retired at the University of Las Vegas, University of Nevada in Las Vegas. And we designed a study to look at attention. Now, just a little bit of background. Attention means, or there's a way to describe attention. Attention is our mental spotlight. And I can't resist telling you this. Years ago, when the first televisions were introduced, people said nobody will ever watch TV because you have to blend out 70% of your visual field to concentrate on 30%. And today, of course, in Melbourne, in the city of Melbourne, they have lights built into the crosswalks because people are always on their phones staring at that 1 or 2% of their visual field, and they're missing the fact that there could be a red light. So our attentional mental spotlight is, of course, very important. And this is a model, so this is not 100% mirror of reality. I just think it's so important to point that out. But here's an idea to organize thoughts. We have a pyramid of attention. When we start to learn a piece, we are down here at the bottom, and there's a whole lot of information that we need to pick up. We have to decipher the score. We're figuring out what notes are to be played. We're deciding on fingerings or breathing. Phrasing comes then next. But we start to, all of the little details that are at the beginning, they start to coagulate into the first groups or chunks. When we continue to learn the piece, we start to work on the overall picture. And in the end, it's enough sometimes when you're all alone by yourself and you're in a good mood and you say, I'm going to play this one piece, and you let yourself flow in the zone because you're not concentrating on anything below this. You're just playing the piece the way you've practiced it. So this is, as I said, so the theory is that at the bottom we have all of these individual things, just the same thing with all of you who are fluent in English will be reading the word rhythm and you won't be deciphering it. And the next time you try to spell it, you may start to think about how it's spelled, but we can all identify the word, but we don't necessarily know the parts anymore. So if we take this pyramid of attention, and I will give you some very specific examples. For example, at the bottom would be use thumb on the E flat, then we would have concentrate on the crescendo that comes in the development section, or we have something, we want to be particularly expressive because we are playing for an audience that really loves this kind of music. All right, now we go out in this model, we go from internal focus, which is looking at the little details, and we go to external focus, which is how does my music affect the people that are listening to it? Now, if we take this model and we say, okay, this is sort of the ECG of a performance. My attention starts way up here, where I'm pretty much here. If this is playing the piece, I'm pretty much in the zone. Here I have a real moment where I'm in flow, everything's going well. And about here I say, gee, I've made it to the 3rd page without a mistake. Or you hear something drop in the auditorium and you say, oh no, they're writing down, that was the judge writing down the measure that the person didn't like. And you say, well, I better concentrate so that I play it well. And your attention drops down here. That's still sort of, I actually have the safe zone. This is still sort of in the safe zone. And here, you really hear somebody mumbling and maybe you're distracted. You say, well, I just have to concentrate because it's coming up the difficult passage and I better put my focus on it. And your attention drops to this level. And sometimes you're putting your attention on something that you haven't looked at for a year, for 20 years, for 40 years, depending on how old you are, because you aren't deciphering the music every time you play it. And this is what we would call the danger zone. So this is the theory. And here's a really, I find from Gabi Wolf, a really good experiment to see how this works. This is called a stabilometer. I don't know if the people online can see me, but it doesn't matter. What it is you're standing and you're trying to keep your balance. And I've been on it, it's not easy at all. So if you're hit on that stabilometer, the natural inclination is to concentrate on my feet and to say, okay, I'm going to keep my feet even so that I stay straight. However, if you are told, so that would be internal focus. However, if you are told to imagine, now these lines are not on the device, to imagine that there are two lines in front of your feet, so only an inch away from your foot, the imaginary line, and the idea is to bring the imaginary lines into a horizontal plane that they are equal to each other. And so the same participants start to use these imaginary lines, and they're looking out into the distance and concentrating on the idea of parallel lines, and they do much better. And this is the external focus. They're focusing on what the effect of their movement will be and not making the movement themselves. So this is the idea we wanted to look at in music. So what did we do? We said, first of all, we have to have professional musicians, or these are master students in this first study. They were told to bring something that they played by heart. They were told to bring something that they had already performed. So all of these things that I had been complaining about in the stage fright studies were not a problem. And we had them perform in front of the camera. And we had them perform in front of the camera in that we told them to play through the piece a couple of times so we could adjust the microphones. Of course, that wasn't what we were doing. We were recording them to get a baseline. And then we asked them, randomized, of course, to vary between the internal and external focus. The internal, I'm going to read you exactly the words, that's why I'm looking down here. Internal was, please concentrate on the precision of finger movements and correct notes. So those people in the internal condition were supposed to do that. And the external was, play for an audience, concentrate on the expressive sound of the music. So, however, I'm going to play you a few seconds of this cellist and think if you could rate whether this person is concentrating internal or external. So, and it goes on. And I tell you, I tried to rate this myself and I just couldn't. The music just caught me. I was just so enthralled in this musician's performance. And this brings me to one of the things that we also needed to control for, and that was, if we tell somebody to concentrate on their fingers and correctness, do they do it? And we actually had participants in the exit interviews in this first study that when we asked them, did you follow the instructions? They said, well, heck no. Why would I want to do that? That's going to make me stumble over my feet. So this is another thing we learned that we really, really had to watch out for. And let me show you, for the nerds out there who love statistics, in this particular one, when we asked the raters to grade technique, there were differences. You can see the external is better, but it's not significant. And for the musicality, it was significant, related both to the control and to the internal condition. Let me take a little, I don't have a good photo of him, so just imagine somebody. I have a friend in Graz who's professor of voice. He's from Amsterdam and is a professional singer and has sung opera all over the world. He speaks 5 languages, so English, Dutch, German, French, and Belgian, I think. And he interviewed 150 different people, singers, vocal professors, agents, opera managers, and opera directors. And he asked them in their native language to just tell him what they rate when they listen to a voice. He was my doctoral student at the time. He was trying to use MacQ data at the time to code the interviews that he had in these 5 languages that he translated all into Dutch, so it would be in one language that he could use. And he was basically distraught because people were honest with him. And there was just no common denominator. And it was everything from warmth, technique, to, we're in the Me Too, post-Me Too movement, I can still say it, into how long the legs are on the singers, or what was the build, and would they fit the role in the opera. I mean, there was just no congruence. So again, a problem that we were working on. And then we revised that study, so the same instructions, but we revised it. And we went ahead to the second study, and the second study, I will show you the participants. Oops, that's not fair. The participants are coming. Again, we had only professional musicians that were playing pieces that they played by heart and playing with out the score. And what we really did this time was we had control, internal and external, that we randomized. We were always doing this, it's called a manipulation check, for those of you who aren't familiar with this, to make sure that people weren't just tired, that the third run-through wasn't either better because they've been practicing in our studio, or it was worse because they got tired, right? And here we also asked them, after every run-through, to go to the desk briefly and to rate on a scale of 0 to 10 whether they followed the focus instructions, so that we could also tell whether they'd be honest. And we also did an exit interview with the musicians, and we asked them to tell us whether they had taken this seriously or whether they thought it was just a great chance to practice their pieces, or whether they felt as if they were simulating the concert situation. In the first study, by the way, I neglected to mention that we had 2 or 3 people in the room to simulate the experience of performing. Okay, let's listen again to this one. So, and again, if you think to yourself, we have primacy and recency effects. How did the person start? How did the example stop? What happened in the middle? If you felt one note was not as well tuned in the middle, does that mean that the entire performance gets worse? It's very, very hard. And yet, this time, we employed our secret weapon. Wrigley and Emerson, they are both in Australia, if I've got it right, and they created and it's a big word, performance evaluation report. What they did was they went bottom up. They collected data from multiple universities of who rates what and how. By the way, one of my students did a very shocking study in Munich. She looked at all of the local competitions, and she found out that not all of the raters even had score sheets. Some of them were just writing down their opinions. They weren't grading it on any particular scale of A to B. And here, these colleagues, and I very much recommend it, Wrigley and Emerson, 2011, they went bottom up. First, they collected what everybody was grading. Then they assimilated that into a new catalog. Then they tested the catalog in the field, and they actually came up with a very good way of measuring performance and a score sheet that seemed very fair to them for all kinds of examinations. And we used that, and this time we had very specific instructions for the jurors. I'm looking at this, for example, for internal, we said, look for accuracy of notes, rhythm, phrasing, dynamics, and fluency of movement. That's what we considered the internal. And for external, watch for expression, tempo, interpretation, mannerisms. Mannerism doesn't have to be negative, and stage presence. So here, as you can see, we had both in the technical range and on the musicality range, we had significant differences to the external condition. So what does that tell us? It tells us that when we go back to this chart and we look here at these imagined events, about things that I bet everybody in this room has experienced yourself, when your focus shifts in the middle of a concert. I mean, I frequently tell my students, and this is not mine, this is from the American jazz pianist Walter Norris, he used to say, there are no easy parts. And the problem is that the things that we play at home that go well, we don't really focus on them because we let them run on automatic. Then we get on stage and we want to play perfectly, and we suddenly start to concentrate on them, and we're giving them attention that they haven't had in ages. And the opposite is true. Those difficult passages that we've been consciously working on, we want them to run on automatic when we're on stage because we just want to get over them and get through them. So this gives us a lot of information about how better to perform. But of course, as a teacher teaching teachers how to teach, I'm also interested in what does that tell us about practice. And so I'm going to go to, and I think I'm pretty much on time with my schedule, so I'm going to get to do this too. So in the first study that you just saw, in the second condition, we used this performance examination rating scale. We did the manipulation control and the control condition. And now we're going to go to a practice study, which, as you can see from my film frame, was a video study, but also a study where the participants had questionnaires where we asked them about their own performances and about how they practiced. What they did was they were asked to send in a video of a practice session. And we didn't say how long, and we didn't say how great, and we didn't tell them it was supposed to be a particularly enlightened session, or it was just the usual practice. We just said we want to practice video, and we had them do a practice log based on self-reflective learning on the 3 phases most of you probably know from Barry Zimmerman and Gary McPherson, this plan, play, appraise, And we also had room, plenty of room for free text so they could also tell us what they thought. So, and again, we went out and said we're going to have volunteers, in typical for science, lots of women volunteers, fewer males. And then we had a whole range of instrumentalists. And I think what's particularly interesting, given in the light of what I said before, was the average age was 27. So we're talking about mature musicians, and they had been playing the instrument for on an average of 20 years. So we're talking about those who really, to put it in very American terms, had made it in their professions, and now we were just asking them to put a spotlight on their practice. So I'm going to play, and all of these, by the way, I have permission from all of these musicians to play these examples. I'm going to play an example for an accomplished pianist, and then I'm going to talk about how she rated this. So just a few seconds of this. So on for 20 minutes like that. Now, those are the practice rooms when I go through the conservatory, when I hear people practicing like that. I have to restrain myself. Do I knock on the door and hand them an article or tell them to go out, that there's a world out there that they're missing? But as we know, that kind of praxis, Russian school, does lead to results. So here's what we have when we rated their videos. We rated them on these three variables: approach, so did they have good strategies? The clarity of what they had decided to practice, was it well described? Could the brain attach attention to what they were trying to do? And then what the raters felt was their progress. And what you just heard is this one, and you'll notice there's absolutely no light gray bar because the raters could not hear any noticeable progress in 20 minutes of repeating the same thing. And it leads also to those phenomenon that we all know of shaking your head in performance with little kids, because it was just the same, whatever wasn't making her happy just continued not to making her happy. Okay, in contrast, I'm going to show you one that has a very high bar of effectivity. This flautist. Again, for many, many minutes, every time, not one repeat, every time was different. So as I said, we heard a lot of, the raters found a lot of progress in that, no progress in the pianist, and now I'm going to show you an example in the middle, and this time my request is that you watch the musician not just for what he's playing, but pay attention till the very end. I want you to see what happens at the end of this clip. Tension, a buildup of tension. If our intentions aren't clear when we're practicing, and we're having that feeling that we're not making progress, it can build up tension and, of course, cause injury. So very important that we take a look at how practice works. And here as I told you, we not only rated them, we also asked them to report themselves how they felt that this was. As you can see, a scale from very effective to not effective. We asked them, was it an easy strategy or a hard strategy? Interestingly enough, almost all of them felt that they were easy strategies. They were doing, I would say, practice laziness. It took things that they had done before. And here I'm going to, here's where the pianist was. Of course, she found her practice was very effective. And as you can see, the others rated themselves somewhere in a slightly more modest fashion. And interestingly enough, there was an organist, and this is my last musical example, who felt that what she was doing was easy to apply, I'll let you be the judge of that. And she felt it as if it was not so effective, but the raters had a completely different view of that. This is Leonard Bernstein's Tschechischer Stamm. That's a tongue twister on an early morning. I'm going to play first a little bit of the piece, and then you'll hear the practice strategy.
Fuchs, du hast ihn ganz gestohlen, gib sie wieder her, sonst wird dich der Jäger holen mit dem Schießgewehr, sonst wird dich der Jäger.
So she's playing a piece in 5, and she's saying a children's song that's actually in 4, and she felt it was rather easy to do, which I can't even imagine as a pianist playing an organ and having my feet doing things other than the pedal anyway. And in addition to that, she's speaking. And she didn't realize how effective it was, but at the end of that practice session, she played the piece one more time, and suddenly the 5s were alive. Suddenly you had a better sense. It wasn't just a little bit off, but you had a feeling that was really in a groove. But she herself had not noticed that. As I said, we try to be honest with ourselves, but we don't necessarily know what it is. And the interesting results of this study was that when we looked at the approach, we were actually looking at how far away from just repeating is the strategy that they chose. So repetition versus innovation. When we look at this, down here you'll see I've got rote versus non-rote. Again, we checked for rater consistency on this, and we had this amazing set of data. You've heard 3 of those, as you can see, highly significant, that the non-rote, the more non-rote it is, the more innovative it is, the more creative it is, the more focused it is on something new, the more significant the progress is. So again, we've got interesting, valuable, reproducible studies that we can do out there, and lots of things that we can learn when we come back to our own decisions for what we do. I would have loved to have a final slide, which is typical for how I teach, in which I summarize all the points that I made and all of the conclusions, but that's not what this session is about. This session is now about you thinking out loud about what you think, what you take from what I just suggested. And then specifically, I'd like to know, don't want to forget them. By the way, this is Gabby Wolf, Margaret Osborne and Gary McPherson, both in Melbourne. Gabby, until she retired in Las Vegas. So, and now, my question to you, what do you think about finding relevance in music performance research, and how do you think we can make studies reproducible? And I would like to open up the mic to everyone in the hall and those on Zoom who would, I assume that somebody in the control room can read chat questions. So, who would like to complain, criticize first? Mic is open. Yes, please.
Hi. I found it very relatable personally, because I think within my own personal performance, there is this moment in time where I feel like I'm in a flow state, and then I start to think, and then what I think is that's the worst thing that could possibly happen to me. And so I think kind of visualizing that on a graph, I think that was helpful for me, and I could personally apply it to my own practice, so I appreciated it.
Oh, I see. Yes, I mean, that's, I had this Russian piano professor, Elena Lapitskaya, fantastic pianist, and she used to tell me, flow shouldn't be on stage, you should be working. And I think there's a way to balance that out, but I always say we practice so that we can be in flow. We can't practice flow, and on stage, just flow is, for me, it's also too little, because then somebody drops a program, something happens with a microphone, or if you're playing in an ensemble, somebody skips a page, all kinds of things, all of us experience these things, then you have nothing to fall back on. I believe that, and I'm glad you said that actually, if we all go back to the attention pyramid, what I would actually recommend is going back to pieces that you have already automated, that you can also perform by heart, that you've performed a long time, and go back to the nitty-gritty and revisit that. And also look, and I'm going to use a pianist example as a pianist, also watch where your eyes are. Because in that moment of crisis where you think, oh, I better do this right, you may look down at your hands and you haven't looked there ever. Because you've been looking at the score, or you've been imagining the piece in your head. These are all things that we can attend to on the pyramid, so that when something happens in concert, we can say, okay, going there, concentrate on the music, concentrate on the expression, everything will work. Yes, please.
Yeah, I really appreciate you mentioned the strategy for practicing, because I think it's an essential part for how effective our practicing is, and it really can save our time if we have a good strategy for practicing. And also, I think it's a lot of habit, like good habit for practicing and the bad habit for practicing. I think there's many great pianists mentioned, like never practice mindlessly. And this is very important. Never do the repeats for half an hour. Do the same repeats, and every time you repeat, you need to think about this time should be better than last time, and what should I change? But I think like some kind of strategy also need to be taught by a teacher. I think that's my own experience. Before I met some of my teacher, I just don't have any strategy. I just want to repeat and make sure it is correct when I'm on the stage. And then I met some teacher who told me, oh, you should practice in this way. And it makes those stuff so much easier. So yeah, I think it's really important, and I really appreciate you mentioning this.
Okay, and to even, and I'll come to you, Lisa, to even underscore that one more time, the micro protocols that McPherson and Osborne have developed. I was doing practice diaries long before that came around, before that was in vogue, and practice diaries are just absolutely important. And it's these three ideas. They were not the wheel invented anew, but it was just that they put it in a context where everybody understood it. And the participants of that study, the practice study, they felt it was an eye opener, because they found out they weren't planning. They weren't evaluating what they were doing. They were making improvements for the next time. And some of them actually, and I think this is a shock in today's world, said, oh, it was good to record my practice session. And anyone who's ever done a recording knows you have to practice listening to yourself. And this is today with today's cell phones. I mean, it used to be tape, and you used to have microphones and everything, and now you can just put your cell phone on the piano or on the music desk, and there you got it. So, yes. Up there.
I just want to say thank you for your time, first and foremost. I had a question on reproducibility. In my experience, I've had a lot of students with a wide variety of different learning approaches. Some people, they're more open-minded. Some people, they need clear direction. Do you think something like this is applicable to different student learning styles? Because I'm thinking about, the way people practice and so forth, and I think about creativity. It's not exactly the most tangible thing either. And I was hoping to ask in regard to creativity, as someone who's writing a paper on that, do you think that this would be reproducible for intangible or non-linear aspects of music like that, for improvisation and creativity?
Absolutely. Actually, I had a very interesting conversation with a jazz musician who participated in one of the earlier studies about goal setting and about dopamine being released in the body when you have a clear-cut idea of what your intermediate or short-term goal is, and how important it is to have goals so that you're being reinforced by the body rewarding you for actually accomplishing something. And this jazz musician said to me, I spend 5 to 7 hours a day practicing, and I never have that feeling of I've accomplished something. And so to go back, why? Because there wasn't a goal. However, a goal does not have to be, and I'm sorry if I feel like I'm repeating myself because I haven't said it here, but I say it so often. Playing the piece with more expression is not a goal. That's vague. We spend an entire lifetime doing that. However, a goal can be play the piece in three different ways, which would open the door to creativity. So I think that there are ways that's to answer your first question. I think there are ways to apply the practice protocols that are suggested, or the 3-part plan, perform, evaluate, or appraise. These 3 parts, I think you can use them for almost any kind of music and for any kind of learner.
Amazing.
And I also believe that many of us may discover parts of us, ways to learn that we haven't tried before that are even more fun, more effective. And especially in a time where everything seems to be going in the opposite direction of creativity. I think it's so important that we force ourselves to not just do what we've always done. And I mean, when I'm tired and I go to the piano, I really have to say to myself, you're not going to play through to see where it's running well and where it's not running well, and you're not going to just hands alone and with metronome do all the things that I did as a little child. They're really trained. I've been conditioned to do that. I said I'm going to actually set goals and I'm going to practice in an innovative way.
Thank you.
Sure. Yes.
I'm a singer and I teach singers, and one of my biggest struggles is teaching them how to practice. And coming from an instrumental background, I find that some of that skill set doesn't actually apply to the voice, because sometimes some of the stuff that we do is qualitatively different, right? On an instrument, you're practicing more muscle memory in terms of just where external things are, whereas in singing, it's internal muscle memory and developing those habits. So I'm curious how you think, particularly the practice strategies might be different for vocalists compared to instrumentalists.
Well, my experience as an instrumentalist sitting in on vocal exams is that there's way too much concentration on the technique and very little on the rest. And I am forever saying music is not about right notes in the right time. And it's the same thing with singers. So I would say, yes, in a way it's a little bit different, because if you're doing warm-up exercises for the voice, obviously you have to get the instrument in shape. You may not have the plan as precisely as you would have it for something that you were trying to do in a different way. And I'm going to say, however, you can say to yourself, I'm going to set a goal for 5 different keys, 5 different runs, one I'm going to do sitting, one standing, whatever. You can vary it and you can plan it, and then you will have the same sense of accomplishment, and you will also have the same range. So I think and I have had vocalists participate in this protocol. It's just a matter of taking it and tweaking it, and to go back again to the question about those learners who are very conservative and want to know how it goes. Well, in the beginning, you most certainly with young students, you have to give them a whole repertoire of strategies so they know what to choose from, and you have to teach them how to problem solve, and these are things that, of course, you need a teacher for. Absolutely. Yes.
Firstly, thank you for a very interesting and eye-opening presentation. So because we're in a Brain Institute, I was wondering, I'm sure there are a lot of studies, but in terms of if you take a performer and you ask them to use internal or external, what is the brain doing?
I don't have access to that equipment, so I haven't looked at a scan that shows that, but I would most certainly imagine that you would have different kinds of activity, absolute different kinds for external, because it's going to be more concentration on hearing, more concentration on taking motor patterns out of the cerebellum without criticism, just allowing things to flow, to overuse the word, or to use the overused word. And when you're concentrating internally, you're actually going to have single muscle planning more visible on the scale. That's what I believe. So I think that would be a terrific study, and I hope somebody gets the funding for it. If there's no other questions directly, I have then one anecdote I want to tell you. When I first moved to Munich, I was living in an apartment that the university had. It had no instrument. I was getting used to the classes. I had come from Graz. I was still living in Graz, so I was just staying there for the days that I was teaching. And I had a concert coming up. I started in March, and in June I knew I had a concert in Vienna where I was going to be playing 2 pieces, and it was going to be live broadcast. So I had a lot of information there that was putting me under pressure to practice. Not having my own instrument, not being absolutely busy. The only time I had to practice was between 11 and midnight. Not my time. I'm an early bird. And yet I used this 3-part strategy. I said, I'm not going to touch the instrument. It was even actually a clavinova. I'm not even going to touch the keyboard before I've given myself an assignment. And I managed to use those hours every evening in only creative, concentrated, positive-oriented, let's stretch my boundaries type of work. And there's a DVD of that performance, and I don't think I've ever played better. So it's also a matter of quality practice. And yes, we can take the quantity out of it, and we can do much better for our own muscles. We can avoid that tension if we're doing better jobs of planning our practice and actually putting the energy into that practice. And if you get to the practice room and you think, I'm just too tired, I'm just gonna repeat, then maybe you should go take a walk first. Were there any questions online? Can you see if I have one more, I have two more here. Okay, yes, please.
Thank you for your presentation. It was super, super insightful. I have a question about because I recently learned about innovative practice, and as you shared, it's super effective and adds a lot of quality to our practice. I was always of the opinion that it's important to balance that type of practice with repetition as you perform or prepare for a performance. But from what you just shared, it seems like maybe that's not even necessary. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts regarding kind of the balance between the two.
Well, practicing creatively doesn't mean that you don't play it twice or three times in whatever design you've decided. If you decided I'm going to play this one phrase with exaggerated dynamics and I'm going to play it 3 times, then you're still practicing creatively, and yet you've got the repetition that's necessary. I have, let's go to back to the Brain Institute. I have never found an answer. I don't think there is one out there. How many times do I need to repeat something before a motor pattern is stored? I just don't think there's an answer. There's probably different answers for all kinds of things. So I'm not saying that any kind of rote practice is bad. It's just how am I employing repeats within the practice and where's my focus? And I think probably the easiest way to make sure that you avoid rote practice is to have a different focus, even if you're repeating the same passage over and over again. So
Yes, so thank you so much. I thought this whole presentation was very insightful into both performance and practice. And I wanted to ask in particular, if you felt that there's a good way to simulate to see how our focus changes in a performance, in a non-performance environment. Because I personally feel that I can focus well in the practice room, and I try to feel like, oh, I imagine if I'm performing, but then it feels obviously totally different than when I'm actually on stage. And performing in front of an audience is not something that we can do on a daily basis, so.
So I'm a big fan of visualization, and I actually taught an entire piano class to be able, and the night before the recitals, to sit in their armchairs and to just close their eyes and imagine the audience and imagine themselves coming out on stage and to imagine themselves going to the instrument and to start to play and to monitor how their heart rate goes up and they start to feel the saliva's gone from their mouth and maybe they have to rush to the restroom. So there's a lot of ways you can simulate this through visualization. That's one thing, that's super important. And the other thing is when you're in the practice room, the problem is we're very permissive with ourselves. So we can be playing the piece and then suddenly we'll think, oh, what's for lunch today? Or I should email so-and-so, or maybe I should check my emails. And I think that practice for stage starts in the practice room where you learn to say stop, concentrate. And in stage fright seminars that I've been doing for the last 20 years, we also go one step further. It's not only seeing the stop sign, it's not only interrupting those negative thoughts, but having something positive to say about it, like I love this piece, and then go on to the next thing. And if you practice focus and concentration in the practice room, then you can expect it on stage. And what you said comes back to what I said in the very beginning, it's a nice bookend, which was, if you don't know that you can play it concentrated well, you shouldn't be going on stage.
Looks like there was one question.
You mentioned that one of the problems that previous years was never confirmed to play the piece. Well, I do not believe that rote drilling leads to optimal learning. So Angela, so I'm trying to say that yes, there's a certain amount of repetition that's necessary so that motor skills can be developed, but rote drilling, mindless rote drilling actually leads us to tune out. And it also leads to a very poor representation, because we're here in the Brain Center, very poor representation in the brain of that particular movement. Adina Mornell is a very famous neuroscientist in Europe and a flautist himself, and he calls this this effect, he says we practice it and we're unraveling it. It's the Penelope effect. If you know your Greek mythology, Penelope was weaving a shroud for her
husband who had gone to war, and every day she would weave it and every night she would pull it apart because the idea was when she finished it, then she would have to marry somebody else. And he uses this analogy, and I think it's perfect. If we practice mindless rote repetitions, or mindlessly and rote practice, then we are unraveling all of the good we've done. Because we're pulling up ever weaker representations of the piece that we're playing. If we're not going back on the attention pyramid, and we're not going back and saying, okay, I'm going to focus on this today. I'm going to refresh the way I'm playing this. I'm going to try new fingerings to make the old fingerings feel good. I'm going to stretch this. I'm going to transpose it. I mean, there are so many ways that we can do this. So yes, there is a difference between rote drilling and learning the piece in a creative way. Yes.
One more question for you. Thank you.
Sure.
What do you think, and I don't know if this is beyond the scope of your study specifically, but the phenomenon of people who perform and essentially like black out during the performance. And so they recall nothing during the period of time where they're performing, where there's no thoughts, it's just like they start the performance and then suddenly it's over. How would you account for that specifically?
Well, did it go well?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, and I think that what we're seeing there is a sort of the other side of flow. We're seeing an automatism, and there are actual certain cultures that say you should block off your feelings and you should just be a machine when you play. And I think this is a sign that it went well that time, but that doesn't mean it's going to go well the next time. And one of the things I found in all of those studies that I looked at in stage fright was that not only is stage fright not a matter of systematic desensibilization, it's not a matter of just doing more of it. If that were the case, then Pablo Casals wouldn't write his autobiography at the age of 80 and say that he still has stage fright. Most of us have not performed as often as Pablo Casals performed in his lifetime. So there are so many different qualities to this, and we just have to make sure that we are addressing them in the best possible way. So it's not a matter of repeating until we can do it without being there. And if it happens that we did it without being there, then it's time to adapt different strategies so that if something happens in the hall, I mean, I bet all of you have had this. I've played right here in Los Angeles. I played a competition as a child where the brakes were not on the piano and it started rolling away from me while I was playing. Right? My friend Walter Norris was performing once and the lights went out, but he didn't notice because he was playing, his jazz musician, he had his eyes closed. And when the lights went back on, the audience roared and he didn't know what he'd done. He opened his eyes, it was, because they couldn't imagine that a pianist could continue to play all of those notes without sight. So anyway, that's, the body has a whole, to not get into all of the nitty-gritty, but the body has all of these ways of protecting ourselves. And this is obviously, that person should also take a good look and perhaps visit a music psychologist about what is the brain, what does the ego not want to see in that moment or not want to hear.
Thank you.
Sure. Good. Yes.
So you talked about how focused practice leads to focused performance, but what about I actually sometimes have the opposite issue where normally I'm very focused during practice rehearsals, but then sometimes I get onto stage and then my brain starts wandering while I'm performing. Do you have any strategies for that?
Well, on stage, I was talking about the stop sign. On stage, you have to be just as rigorous with yourself as you would be at home. So if you're home and you start to have stray thoughts and you practice tuning them out, then even if you're good at doing that at home, you have to, then when you're on stage, you have to be really strict with yourself. There's just no room. We're in this loop. We musicians, and vocalists, we're hearing what comes next, we're playing, and we're hearing what was. We're basically in 3 different time frames at the same time. There is no spare space. There's no extra energy to be wasted on thoughts like the person in the second row looks as if they're unhappy with me, or I just heard somebody unwrap a candy in the back row. I mean, those are things, we need that energy for listening to ourselves.
Great.
Yes.
Regarding to the stage question, based on my personal experience, I still have a question about my strategy is to either go through every point on the score in the practice room, but when I get on the stage, I just think about nothing and just rely on my muscle memory. Is there any research about that? I saw you study on brain science. So is there any research about it?
Directly on that, I can't tell you, but to come back to what I said before is starting to work in the practice room and then on stage on thinking of the effects of your music on the audience. Now, I don't mean think about, how are these two gonna, how's Beatrice gonna like what I'm playing? I'm just talking about this general, I'm playing for the audience. And playing for the audience means concentrating on the expression. And I believe, especially in today's day where you can go online and hear a note perfect performance on YouTube. Of course, that note perfect performance may not have been a note perfect performance when it was played, it was altered. In the beginning, there was splicing of literal tapes, and now you can actually fix a note. If it's not, you don't even have to play it right, you can fix it in the, so to speak, the technician can do that. So working on expressiveness and also maybe giving yourself permission that live performance doesn't mean just perfection. So I would never have a goal if I wanted to run automatically because I want to interpret something. I was once extremely lucky. I was hired to do 11 performances of the same concert in Berlin. That's something that I had been jealous of friends who are actors. And actually, I remember one play we went to where I met the actor afterwards. It was a solo piece in German. I won't get into the details, but anyway, I think it was his 157th performance of it, right? And we're lucky if we have a season where we can play something 2 or 3 times. And I got the opportunity to play it 11 times over the course of a month. And for the first time, I had the feeling of I can actually experiment with communicating with the audience because it's no longer about can I play the pieces, can I play them by heart, can I play them in the right, can I play them in the right mood? But I started to have a little bit of that space. And I would wish that to each of you who plan to be performers, that it's not just about this one time, but it's more the general perspective on performance, which leads me to one thing that I would like to just plug to, which is that we do not do enough of listening to performances after they happened. We don't, I studied aviation psychology for my dissertation, and what I love about aviation psychology is it's not the pilot's fault that they're looking for what led to an accident or what led to an incident. And we don't have enough of that in music education and in music performance science. It's not about who played the right and wrong notes, it's not about who was expressive or not, but what are the circumstances that encourage musicians to feel healthy on stage and to be expressive. And what happened with me? And I think going back to my slide where I had this picture of looking in the mirror, being honest with yourself, not when the performance is over saying, okay, well, I survived that, and then you go out and have a drink and that was it. But coming back, watching the tape, looking at the moments, not only those that you felt were suboptimal, but more importantly, looking at what went well. And there's, in this society that's always focused on mistakes, we invest too little energy in looking what worked for me that time, can I reproduce that next time?
Great. I'm just gonna say, because the question of brain came up a couple of times, unfortunately, our neuroimaging techniques are very limited to understand performance. So if I had the possibility of putting someone in the scanner and look at their music performance, we would learn a lot more. But there are emerging techniques coming up with like wireless EEG headsets, FMIRs that would allow us to look at online performance and learn more about that. Because I think our knowledge in music psychology when it comes to performance is very limited. And these were just really insightful. So with that, let's thank Adina for